are overrated. This is overrated. What is overrated? Well, according to Reddit user, it's apparently Sideshow's ability to make Overwatch world rankings by saying, and I quote, "Overrated. Runaway should be a bit lower, and Africaflix Blue should be a bit higher, IMO. I don't think Runaway can adapt to the triple DPS meta. AFB likes to change their comp a lot, and triple DPS is the strongest at the moment."
There you go. Well, I've been told. Got to respect his credentials, this Reddit poster.
Yes. Also very faint with his -2 upvotes. Though I have seen it at -6, so maybe he's making a comeback and his statement actually holds true. I also loved this comment, which was like, Rogue are the only team that can go 3-1 and go up in ratings. And then he's like, edit, read this article about Rogue, and you apparently said their performance against Kong de Panthera could have seen them win 3-0 without 2 crucial fights being clutched by Panthera. And he's like, are you actually having a laugh? Could be the bias be any stronger? KDP won 3-1, but if Rogue had just won more fights, they would have won 3-0. If KDP had won a few more fights, it would have been a walkover. What ifs are fairly irrelevant, especially when you use them on one side. So I guess that's a good entry in terms of getting into this, right? So rankings in general are fairly controversial, right? They do serve a purpose, but I guess the first question would be, how do you arrive at your process? Because you do outline them in the start of your posts, but how do you arrive at them?
Well, the first thing to say is that it's not just me. Right from the beginning, when we started this in August 2016, the only ranking system that was in Overwatch was the Ghosted Gamer rankings, notoriously broken. They had like Immortals at number 1 for so long when they were just clearly not a number 1 team. Nobody would put them in their right mind at number 1. They were just up there because of all the NGE stuff. There were so many games and all of that. Then there's also plusforward.net's rankings, which I find to be somewhat better. Over.gg's just released its kind of algorithmic rankings, but Harsher had just started at the same time as us, and we thought now's a pretty good time. I think APAC Premier had just concluded, so it was the first time that you could ever even begin to tie the pieces together from different regions without just blindly guessing, which is always a fun thing to do as well, because I do love a little bit of blind guessing. But the general idea with the rankings is that myself, Harsher, and Admirable sit down, the guys behind OverGG, or the guys behind the bulk of the writing, most of the editorial writing, sit down and we draft up a list of about the top 15 to 20 teams that you would think would probably have a chance of getting it. Then I sit down and I gather all the data of all the games that they've played over a set time period that's normally 2 to 3 months. We look at, I write down every single game that they played, the score on each map, and their opponent as well. And we look at specifically quite a high component of which teams they've played and beaten, along with where it actually managed to get them. So, for example, Africaflix Blue, when they made the run through to the finals in Apex, we didn't just look at that and say, okay, they made the finals. We looked at that and said, okay, the bracket was ridiculously easy, so we're going to obviously kind of deduct some mental points when we're working this out. And the other thing to keep in mind as well throughout the whole thing as well, that constantly comes up when people criticize rankings, just in general, not just ours, is that for a team not to be at a particular place, there have to be better teams with like better results to make the case that they should be above them. You can't just have nobody at number 1 and then just, all right, I think that actually Lunatic High should be rated like 3rd this month, but who are you going to put in 1st and 2nd? Like it's a comparative ranking right across the world. Yeah. So a lot of these things kind of come into it. We do slightly, right from the beginning, it was our intention to weight LAN results much more heavily, but it's proved almost impossible to actually do that in the Overwatch scene because there are so few LANs and in fact so few tournaments. And so again, there's so many different like caveats to making these rankings that come from just the current state of the Overwatch scene. It's nothing like CSGO where you have like fresh tournaments each week and you get to see different matchups all the time. If a team's playing in Apex, somebody like Runaway who managed to place like 4th, I think, was playing on the, I don't know, like 5 games or something over the course of 3 months, but you kind of have to take all of that into account as well.
Sure. So the big question for me is, why straight to global rankings? Like, okay, you want to arrange rankings and you want to go for the top teams. Why don't you do rankings on a regional basis, like North American, European, Korean, and then from there you go to the global scale, for example?
That's what I've actually started to do now. I've kind of worked the other way around to it. So I'm now doing video series whenever I release the rankings to discuss my... I've actually not done like rankings in each region, but I've done tiers within each region and then talking about where people kind of place. Because I feel like the tier system is much more clearly defined. Like you can make much stronger arguments for where teams are in terms of tiers than you can literally right now. Like this team is currently better than this team, etc. That's kind of like an artificial human way of just slapping like a ladder system onto results that really don't work for it. But as to why we went straight to world rankings, just because it's kind of fun. It's just a fun thought experiment to see like where do you think these teams match up, generate some discussion about them at the same time as just facilitating the discussion around where are these regions at the moment and how do they match up. You know, I don't particularly buy into the idea that you need concrete data to ever put forth your opinion on something. And obviously these are opinions because they're kind of subjective rankings.
Sure. So my next question, follow up on that. You know that, for example, many teams, and especially teams that try to break to the top tiers of any scene, they use, for example, the gross rankings as leverage, and they say to actually attract potential sponsors or whatever. Like, we're the number 13 team in North America right now, out of a number of like 15 teams in the database of gross rankings. That some of them probably are not even existing at this point, or they have transformed over the course of the months. So hard that you have no idea which roster they're featuring at this point. So how do you address all this? Like, you're obviously influencing people and the scene by doing this in this manner. Like you say, guys, these are the top 10 teams, obviously in my opinion, but because you have like an audience, a following as such, so you are affecting the opinion, and obviously maybe you're also affecting how people approach teams like Selfless or teams like Rogue right now.
Yeah, but I think that what I'm doing is adding more of like an expert opinion without just letting the stats completely rule which teams end up where. Because teams right from the beginning of beta were, as you were saying, using the Gosu rankings not just to say like we're X team in the world, but actually pitch to sponsors and say that we are X team in the world without really qualifying that on the basis of anything other than we look at our rating on Gosu Gamers, which was the most popular site, and that's why people use it so much. But as I said before, there's been a history of teams who are way inflated and use that peak of their inflation to like, oh right, we're at like a really high ranking. And it's the same kind of thing if you're playing in a ladder game like Overwatch Ranked. If you get to a really high rating, you know yourself that you probably shouldn't be there, and so you feel good about that, the fact that you've kind of not just this is my level, but this is like a really good level for what we're actually performing as. So I feel like by adding more of a opinion based or overall look of these teams, then it counteracts some of the randomness and some of the statistical errors that just come up when you're using those kind of rankings. And I don't think that you really have that much impact on the scene if you're just doing a global top 10, because almost all of the time these teams are comfortable within organizations anyway. If I was doing something like a top 10 within each region, then once you start getting down to like the 7th team or whatever, then you're probably like giving a real boon to those teams by saying like, look, these guys are sick and look out for them. I think the only team that really applies to now is Cyclone. Like, these guys really should have an organization behind them, judging by how well they've performed so far. They didn't even make our rankings anyway. They almost did. We actually, this month, we were heavily debating increasing it to 11. And Admirable said, why not? I mean, it's not called the top 10, it's called the world rankings. But I shut him down. I like the number 10. You got to stick with the decimal system.
To be fair, I feel the need to sort of jump in because of the mentioning of Gosu rankings. The worst thing I ever did was adding GG to my nickname on Discord, because what this means is basically every small team manager jumps into my DMs and says like, "Oh, can you add that Go for OW? Because that would totally put us in the top 25, which we actually obviously aren't, but you know that's how they acquire sponsors. So I guess my point would be, yes, if you do a global ranking, your responsibility is probably not as high in that sense because you're not really deciding anyone's income or anything. But there's still, for instance, where I could see some responsibility is, for instance, do you feel your rankings would be an accurate measurement of doing seeding for an international event? So IM comes to you and says, okay, can we use your top 10 list?
I think that normally when you want to do seedings of tournaments, that actually you probably shouldn't do them based on who you think are the top like teams at the time. But if you actually want a seeding just to have some really awesome entertainment in that moment, then doing it more heavily based off current form than we do, where we're giving weight to like a little bit to the legacy of teams that on how they've performed within the last few months and stuff, and where we think their overall level is. Definitely you could use it for something like seeding, but I think if you're going to like I've had to seed a couple of tournaments. People have asked me to like lend my my expertise. I hate calling myself an expert. I'm not an expert any more than anybody else. I just have a platform for it. But the people have asked me to kind of lend my opinion to stuff like that, and I don't always go the same way as who are the top 10 teams. You know, I keep in mind the fact that you want big names, you want people that people are going to enjoy seeing play. You want seeding that if two teams are pretty close, then you actually could build the bracket to have like a really cool storyline in one particular sense. If it's literally 50-50 between them, then that's also something to think about, because that'll lead to better enjoyment of the tournament overall and give you like an extra storyline and narrative to play into that. When you're kind of crafting that, I think you have to think a little more about form than we do, which is something that we definitely have in mind, but we don't too heavily skew it that way. But yeah, I think you could use it for something like that. Certainly, you would at least have the right teams involved, I think, even if they weren't in the right order.
And how does the tournament format of a tournament, to be honest, affect your rankings? So you have, for example, like the top 3 or top 4, or in this month, top 4 teams are from a league tournament. It's not a weekend-based tournament, and these teams play like one game every 1 week or 2 weeks, or I don't know how the schedule of the Apex system works. So how does these really few games? I mean, it goes 6 games for Runaway during the Epic Season 2 run, and 7 games for Lunatic High to reach the finals, because Lunatic High went the lower bracket of their quarterfinal phase. And how do they compare, for example, to a circuit? I mean, even a LAN circuit, not only online tournaments that have a weekend size. Even, for example, an MLG Vegas circuit that goes in 3 days long, and you play all those games. How can you compare and weight its tournament format and its tournament this way? Even if the results are the same, it's not the same amount of pressure, and there's not the same amount of of fatigue on the players.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in terms of personal preference, I know that Overwatch, with the Overwatch League and stuff like that, is leaning, and like the Pacific Championship and the Premier Series and all of these things. It looks like Blizzard are leaning more towards the league format, where you have regularly scheduled content, and you know when to tune in, and you know that the storyline's building over a longer period of time and getting long-term fans and stuff like that. But I far prefer having tournaments that pop up fairly frequently, where you can see different teams making runs and then compare that over a longer period of time. That would be my personal preference, and I know that's the preference of quite a lot of people as well. I think Monty recently released a tweet or something saying that he prefers the tournament circuit kind of concept for esports, the way that tennis kind of does things, compared to leagues. But in terms of how it affects the rankings, you definitely have to keep in mind that, I mean, for starters, if Apex wasn't where the best talent in the world currently is, then it would hold almost no weight. For example, if it was like the Carbon series that happened, because you're stretching things out and you have a league format, but it's not actually the best teams in the world, then it pretty much turns to like almost useless kind of data. Like it doesn't really mean anything at all. The only reason that Apex is so high up there is because it's the best teams in the world. It's currently the best tournament or league in the world, as in the most prestigious teams really want to win it. And it's been proven that these are the best teams because we've sent the best Western teams at various times, and the Koreans have beaten them, and they're at the very least on par with if you collected a lot of the best teams and shoved them in there. Stuff like IEM has proven that there's majority of the talent in the world is going to be centered over there.
Okay, I'm going to jump on this because, okay, you sent 2 of your best teams in a 60-team synthetic tournament. So your chances are against you. I mean, you have to face constantly Korean teams one after the other, and they're also playing on their ground, on their format, in a safe zone, for example. I mean, Reinforce in his recent interview with Whiska stated that, for example, back in Overwatch Open, which was like in September 2016, they had to play like 4 games back to back, and because of this, the fatigue was too much, and it affected their performance a bit. So, how you evaluate? Like we talked about this on our first episode with Whiska. Like you have all those factors, like you have to live in a hotel, you have to constantly be in a practice mode or a competition mode. You can't relax like you relax when you're in your hometown going for a walk or something like that. You have to also count into factors like the food. I think, for example, Gator from Fatigue was saying that his players were having almost food poisoning before a tournament match because they were testing things out in Korea. So I mean, it's obviously you have, for this moment in time, the best competition because you have all the big names mostly. Although, to be fair, in Apex Season 2, like, I don't think that Fnatic or Misfits were really at the top of level, or I wouldn't consider to be Fnatic over Rogue, for example, even at that time. Although we didn't have any data to send Rogue because they hadn't played since Apex Season 1, I think. In the last match was that one. Anyways, I think like it is the best competition, but you still have it still favors a lot the Koreans because it is tailored for the Korean teams up to a point because it is their league, and you invite some other teams to spice up the competition and see how probably some teams fare against other teams. And you obviously have the groups. For example, right now Rogue is in a group that's probably the group of death. This could be like the semifinals, 2 semifinals in there.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah,
it's actually the seeding for Apex. You don't want to get me started. Honestly, the seeding for Apex has been appalling almost every season. I don't know where they're pulling these things out of because they also, when you looked at how they were seeding Apex Season 2, and it should have been based on Apex Season 1, surely, but they didn't actually put one team from Super Week in each group and one team that came in the quarterfinals in each group. I was looking and I couldn't make sense of what they're actually doing here. So either they're trying to craft really cool narratives by putting a big thing in one group and then all the folks around there, or they're just doing it randomly with balls out of a thing like they love to do in the playoffs or something. I honestly don't know what's going on with that, but the fact that every season they somehow manage to create a group that has like 3 really top teams that you would want to see in the playoffs, and then 3 comparatively pretty easy groups, albeit this season there's only really 2 that look very easy and then 1 that looks kind of middling, but Kongdu and Sierra have actually dropped off and Freak and Freaks Blue have stepped up, so it's still, there's potential for some interesting games there, but the other 2 are just cut and dried. And then you've got one group that has 3 unbelievably good teams in that could be the 3 best teams in the tournament, realistically, if you played it out multiple times. It blows my mind, honestly, how they managed to do that 2 seasons in a row, but there you go.
I mean, I actually, as odd as it sounds, because from a standpoint of competitive integrity, it's obviously awful. But if you think about how this unfolds, I actually wanted that group of death for Rogue because they had their peak in the Western region. Then we have some of the strongest Korean teams in there. We immediately see them match up, so we sort of get a skill comparison. There's no interference from Blizzard here with some odd patch, right? So we actually get sort of like a solid skill comparison between the scenes. And then you can, if you're OGN, you can get lucky that because of some patch, other groups where the first team maybe wouldn't even have made it out of the group suddenly is much stronger, right? So it's a bit of a gamble, but at the same time, like the cogs that were thrown into the, especially in the Apex Season 1 format by Blizzard. I guess they sort of fixed this with the tournament realm in the second iteration. But, you know, if you were to craft a system around that, I don't think it's that bad from that regard.
I think just one of the problems is that the Apex series is so long that if a team doesn't make playoffs, they are essentially not playing in any tournament for ages and ages. Now, Rogue are actually coming back to play in Takeover too, so at least we'll get to see them there. But for a team like Misfits or Rogue when they got knocked out of Apex beforehand, they just kind of went missing for a long time. I don't want that to happen when there could have been a potential of some really cool tournament runs and teams clashing in the semifinals and stuff like that. And they also have the tournament realm to play on well, they seem to like to change it just before the playoffs, which I can see the argument for like having the groups on one patch and playoffs on another. It kind of makes more sense than having half the groups on one patch and half the groups on another.
Yeah. Here's one thing that I have a big, or I guess, let me ask you this. If, let's say, Envious was invited, immediately accept their invite, and NRG was invited, right? Then Envious gets to, let's say, play 3 NA tournaments in their region, and they crap out of every single one of them. So now the invites are going out, all hotels are booked, we know NRG is underperforming. How do you make your world rankings when the West isn't even sending their best teams? Like, you have no leverage point there, right? You have no point of comparison. How do you do that then?
Well, at that point, you have to try and go the same way as you do when you're integrating either the European teams in or teams like Selfless who actually haven't played against that competition, or even Rogue. I mean, if we'd released the rankings 2 days beforehand, then we wouldn't have had a metric to go off other than them beating Mighty AOD, which isn't that big a metric, really. Like, you don't know how they're going to fare against the top opponents. And so at that point, it is just a bit of not just... I mean, it's the same kind of like analysis and intuition you would use when you think about any roster that you haven't seen go up against another top tier roster. You think about their abilities and how they've previously shown themselves. I think within Overwatch as well, you can actually tell pretty well from how cohesively a team is playing, even if they're not playing in a certain region or against super top tier opponents. You can still see kind of sparks of excellence. Even if a team is not playing in Apex or something like that, you can tell that they're good. They don't just have to be stomping everybody. So I think there are ways that you can make reasonable guesses at placing teams, but yeah, you wouldn't have any data to go on. You'd have to use the eye test.
Oh, here we go. The trigger word. Jump on the caracol.
No. I think in his case, I will give him the credit, because I want to ask him, especially, have you done rankings in the TF2 scene that you were involved before? Like,
no, the thing with TF2 was there weren't enough regular tournaments, and there was essentially just one league in either city. Like, there was one main league in Europe and there was one main league in North America. So what's the point in making it was almost like when we made last month's rankings and the top 5 teams are just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in Apex, because they all actually happened to play each other as well and kind of sort out who was on top of who, and they just nicely sifted into the exact top 5. So that would have been the same case when it was, and that's kind of the problem with league systems as well, is that they are a long form. They tend to like play with round robins and stuff like that, so they very nicely sift out teams. So at that point, you don't really have to do that much analysis. You don't have to look at the data and see who beats who. You can almost literally trot out the thing, and that takes some of the skill, some of the enjoyment, and some of the point out of it as well.
Okay, so also how much, for example, your insight and your assigned info that you get from the scene, or because you're a generalist essentially, so you're not like a statistician that works only with the numbers, or you're trying to find the formula to form those rankings. You're also writing a lot of things, and you're also investigating a lot of things and this stuff. So how much is your, and probably the other 2 members as well, Admirable and Harsa, because they're both invested in this aspect of Overwatch right now, like to get out info, to gather info, such. So how much info from other sources, for example, coaches, player opinions, or whatever help you decide, for example, the rankings when you're indecisive or when you like can't go on with data?
As far as I can tell, as far as I can remember, sorry, I don't think that we've ever used like insider information or scrim results or something like that, or like Skipjack's opinion that Panthera were unbeatable in scrims back in Apex Season 1 or whatever that was. I don't think, as far as I can remember, that we've ever used that to actually decide like rankings. It's mostly done off who has beaten who, and we all watch all of the games that happen with these major regions. Admirable runs the ticker at over.gg, so he's constantly watching games. I do as well, so that I can stay up to date on North American, Korean, European scenes, stuff like that. So it's done based on like the data, but also how you're seeing the teams play and like how you're mentally assessing them and seeing how, like, it seems weird, but like just how good you actually see them and how good they appear to be.
So, for example, if the coach of Atlantic High says for this season, like, Rogue could easily be a top 2 team in the tournament if they were in another group, for example, if they didn't face both Kongtu Pathera and Atlantic High, or they weren't in this group. So he could see them being challenging the top spot of the tournament. Would you value that, or would you neglect it at all? I mean, would it have any kind of weight, in your opinion, as you decide the rankings?
I don't think so, for a couple of reasons. The first is that I don't think Lunatic High, and I mean, yeah, I guess you're using this as an example, but it applies to quite a lot of them. I don't think they're actually scrim partners. Like, they don't play all the time anyway, so it's not like a super informed guy just because he happens to be coaching another team. He's probably done.
He just sees the result as you do. I mean,
yeah. Well, no,
on that
yeah,
level.
on that literal basis, then no. I mean, I can see the results. Like, I know that they would have been a good team if they hadn't been in that group. He's essentially like offering nothing extra that I couldn't bring to the table anyway. So it's kind of, I don't know, useless extra information. So I wouldn't count that in.
You essentially right now put your place in the coach position of one of the best teams in the tournament, because you're saying that he doesn't offer any insight. Like...
Well, I'm just saying that if he's watching the games the same as I am and not like basing it off scrims or any kind of results like that, then yeah, he's just essentially doing the same job as me. He's looking at the games and observing and seeing like how well they think.
One of the best teams in the tournament. Essentially, you're not coaching one of the best teams in your opinion. And I think that especially the Lunatic High coach, although this example could actually have another coach in there, especially Lunatic High's coach, I think he has affects really much how the team plays, and he can see, for example, weaknesses and strengths in another composition or whatever. So, do you think you're on par with him? I mean, this is right now.
By the way,
I think that
just a side point, Caracol thinks he's on par, if not higher than him. So, just so you know what your answer should look like.
But here's the thing: although he probably does, or he definitely has skills from being a coach. I don't even know who the guy is actually. Like, I'm not familiar with most of the Korean coaches because that's something that you don't get that much insight on. But the fact that somebody is a coach for a top team or someone is a top player for a top team doesn't offer them, or doesn't immediately say that they have any expertise or accolades outside of what they've demonstrated within their capacity as a coach. So yeah, he might be really sick at helping his own team craft like certain strategies and whatever, but that doesn't mean that he is also an expert at being able to tell which other teams would be good in hypothetical situations where they were going through another tournament bracket. Like, in a sense, for example, if you got the president of Zimbabwe or something, I'm sure he's a very smart man and very good at economics or whatever, but he's offers nothing extra to that situation because it's a different realm. Like, just because you're a good coach and you're able to help your own team succeed, I don't think that gives you some special insight on being able to identify ability in others beyond that which a lot of other analysts within the scene would already have.
I mean, there's also something to say about the Korean cultural filter, where everyone is apparently just the best team in the world, right? Constantly. It's like a superposition of best teams in the world. You never know. And depending on when or who you ask about to the Korean coach, he will say, yes, this Western team is the best right now, right? So, but here's one thing, because we've also talked about these structures in seeing how we evaluate certain concepts within our esport, how we make it our own, right? So obviously a prominent world ranking type that happens in CS:GO is Thorns, right? So I think he recently even released the top 5 players. He ranks the top 10 teams and everything. But does in general this framework work for Overwatch, or where did you see like that you did have to adapt? For instance, do you think that the duration of, I think you'd taken 3 months or 4 months of time frame?
We were originally taking 2. We've had to, at times, like over the winter, extend it to 4 because there weren't any results over the winter period, and there's so little results in general that you kind of have to extend it. And now we've gone back to 3, which seems more reasonable for this current climate. For sure, you have to adapt it. Like, I'm very familiar with Thorin's rankings as well. I enjoy his work, read a lot of it within CS:GO as well. And I mean, one of the big differences is that he only counts LAN performances, and you couldn't possibly do that within Overwatch. I mean, if you tried to do it, and I know that when they have their what's it called, oversight podcast, they often talk about how the like Thorin, for example, only watches LANs and stuff like that, but that kind of mindset doesn't translate over to Overwatch in its current state whatsoever, because you would just be napping on some really good teams that haven't had the opportunity to go to LAN and prove it. And from what we've seen so far, it doesn't seem like it's the same large difference between online and offline play in Overwatch as it has been in other esports. That, as far as I can tell, there hasn't been a very major difference in teams that have been playing online and then gone to offline and lost. I mean, there's been a couple of teams that were upset and like offline qualifies for Apex, but I don't know whether you can really point the finger there or whether there was something extra going on.
Yeah, at most you have teams that are obviously split because of ping differences, like a phase that then comes together, and then just it doesn't even mess up the rankings as much as that they just shove themselves above a couple of teams they usually don't beat online, and that's fairly expected, right? So in general, I think the argument of online is completely something you shouldn't consider is weak because we don't have anything else most of the time, but also because it translates so well. And I did some extensive research on that. There was a small dip during, I think it should have been, what was the LAN tournament? I think it was during MLG Vegas, where the rankings were sort of smashed up, where you had your NA rankings, and then the way teams placed was sort of shaken up. But other than that, I think Overwatch online play, and for whatever reason, I guess that's a idea too, like why that is fairly indicative of the real level of play of the offline performance, right? Why do you think, or do you think, I guess, why do you think that is?
I think for starters, there's probably a difference that hasn't really shown itself yet, because you haven't had lots of offline competition at the same time as lots of online competition. It's not like CS where you see tons of online leagues that then have offline finals. That happened with the Winter Premier, and what else? Has there been another series that had like online
Atlantic
qualifiers?
Showdown. The very first one. But
yeah, kind of. But it was like qualifiers, right? It was more like qualifiers for an actual offline tournament than a league that went into playoffs.
But the thing is that Thorin also has a problem with this. Sorry to interrupt you, but because FaZe Clan and Astralis did not manage to qualify in the EPL season tournament. So essentially, what he says is that any kind of qualifier that these teams have to go through, it's a potentially deadly zone for them. Like any team can upset them, and he wants like invites. He wants teams to be invited straight to the event based on their performance in LAN events. And this is an issue for me, because like right now, and almost in every esports scene from the beginning of time, I think that like you had always online competition, and then the best teams in online playing with all these factors, like ping factors, like the comfort zone of the players being in their houses. Then they moved on and went to the finals. But somehow right now, because you have the ability to host so many LANs across the world, like I think CSGO has one LAN every other week, I think. There's a LAN tournament every other week. So because you have this ability, then somehow you start to neglect the results in the online process, and you start to focus so much in offline results. So also talk a bit about this, like how does it play in Overwatch right now?
I mean, the thing in general just about online is that if you wanted a tournament where people can come and you haven't really heard of them, but they can come and have a really deep run in your tournament, you can't do that offline. Like, you can't just hold an event and go, yeah, anyone who wants to come and turn up. You can do that online. Like, you can open a bracket to as many teams as want to sign up if you're running an online tournament. If you're running something offline, you can't just say, yeah, just come on down and we'll see how many teams we get and then we'll run a tournament with it. It's impossible to work because of the logistics of running offline.
Right? In some
With
sense
with BYOC,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, if you wanted to do something like that, but no, like the top teams just can't play BYOC.
Yeah.
They're not willing to carry their own computers out there and do everything, that kind of stuff.
Divas.
But yeah, I mean, that's also a possibility. Like if you had something like DreamHack Winter where they had BYOC qualifiers, but again, the kind of teams that are going to be that you're going to want to make appearances in those kind of qualifiers and would potentially make upsets or deep results and show themselves as like a team with up and coming promise, they're not going to have the support to be able to fly PCs out and get sponsors and stuff like that. So it doesn't really work as a solution either. In terms of Overwatch as well, again, that doesn't work because a lot of the teams, there's so much kind of up and down within the scene. Patches shift things not right back to base zero, but they shift things down to a bit more of a level playing field where, or not even shift things back down to a level playing field. Sometimes they can just swing things so that suddenly what were unreliable, inconsistent players within your team are now the gods of your team because a certain hero that they were really sick at but wasn't in the meta is now really in the meta. So it can have a big swing like that where if you were trying to invite teams, you don't have really the data to go on and you want there to be some avenue for up and coming talent to get into the scene because it's so young. So I can definitely see the argument for CSGO, even though I think you would be neglecting teams that were developing and getting up there. But at the same time, in CSGO, a lot of the teams that you think of as up and comers are making like good results at offline events. They're not making good results online, and then they're getting like they're immediately accelerating into good results offline. There's a slower process where teams start to build up their performance in smaller offline events before they actually would get invited to the big ones. But that doesn't happen in Overwatch at all because you don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the tournament circuit, you just have online competitions and then huge offline ones occasionally.
Still, this will be the case with the Overwatch League. I mean, in their message, in their promotional video, they try to make this, ladder system with the steps like being you have to play online, you have to make a name for yourself of online, like Crusher 99, he was the big promotional
What a god.
hero. Yeah.
Love that guy.
He doesn't drop in patches, like he's steadily up there. He's maining Tracer. Okay. So yeah, they want to, install this process in the circuit right now. Like you're going well on online games, that you're getting scouted to teams, and then you go and play offline because the whole Overwatch League will be probably an offline circuit.
I hope so.
Yeah.
That would be.
It was what they want.
Yeah, if it has an online component for like the main season or something, then oh boy, will that be a bit of a flop in my expectations. But yeah, in terms of how they're getting like people in, I think that was a little bit of kind of like a PR thing to try and align them more with regular sports to try and really lay out a path for players to get from ranked into the thing and like appeal to their player base that you can as well be a pro. Like you always could be. You would have to do well in an online team and then you would have to go and prove yourself, and that's essentially just what they've laid out.
But Sideshow, that's the genius of the Overwatch League, right? Localization. You get one arena, and every game is a home game. You constantly get the home crowd. You just play online. Isn't that the solution?
Genius. That's fantastic. You have a tournament, and they're all like virtual people. They're like it's just a tablet, and everyone FaceTimes in and watches the tournament live. Beautiful. You solved it.
Nice. Well, to be honest, the first step is made with the Overwatch World Cup right now because they will fly every person that will participate from wherever they will be in the world to the tournament venue for the group phase, and then
Yeah.
to BlizzCon. So they want it to be offline.
Yeah,
But
that's a big improvement, right, over last year's
yeah.
format.
Yes.
Yeah, last year, to be honest, it was not. It was like USA, you get directly promoted to forwarded to the BlizzCon event because the servers are on your soil, so you have some kind of unfair advantage of the poor Thailands that will have to go up against you. Like, yeah, this time it will be a lot more competitively integral. But the issue I see with this is like, sure, you can fly everyone from wherever the world they are. What happens to tournaments? Like, Epic Season 3 finals will be held 1 month after the semifinals because of this. We had like patches upset Apex seasons, and now we have also Overwatch World Cup upsetting Apex season. I mean, how do you see all those things messing up together? Like, and how do these things will affect, for example, your OverGG rankings of July or whatever?
Yeah, it'll make it hard to actually find a good point of time to run them, because if you have to wait for the final to find out who was the best in Apex, then by that time, like the early playoff results are almost like useless because they were run 3 months ago or something. So yeah, it makes it difficult from that point of view. In terms of how they mesh tournaments together, as far as I know, the main plan with Overwatch, like if you take a step back and look at how they want things to go a year or 2 years down the line, is that they want the Overwatch League to be like I think it was like 4 to 6 months or something of the year, and then there to be an off season for the rest of the time. They've been very vocal about how they really want an open circuit that's in the off season of the Overwatch League. And these two things, and presumably the World Cup as well, wouldn't then intermesh with each other and overlap on dates. But because we're in the preseason and things aren't quite figured out yet, that I think they don't really have like the schedule perfectly down. But if you in a year's time, I think it would be at that point kind of you could point to that and say, what the hell are you doing with the schedule?
For North America.
Well, if we're taking a step back and saying a year down the line, then definitely, I mean, they could have expanded to further areas like that like a year later. They don't have to just limit the Overwatch League to North America for
they don't
more
have
than the first season.
Yeah, more the first season though. I mean, the first season will be 6 months, and then in the next 6 months you will have the Overwatch World Cup, and European tournament will be probably running. I mean, if there will be any at all, because we have seen some interesting changes like the Dignitas dropping their roster, which for me was like something out of the blue up to a point, because they're a European-based team. So, I mean, it will work in this sense for the North America side of things, because they will have their league over there, mainly due to the localization issues. Like, you have to be close to each other to fly to participate in the matches if they're all offline, or unless they go for an LCS somehow type of thing, where they have all the teams in one place. They gathered for, I mean, one weekend, for example, and they play the games, and then they disperse, and then they come again for like in 2 weeks, or I don't know how this.
They could do that for season 1.
Yeah.
But then they could do that in Europe as well. Like anything that you can apply to North America, I don't think is a problem if you're applying it across Europe as well. America's fucking big. Like if you're flying from one end of it to the other to do home and away games, is that really much different to Europe?
If you're talking about geographical factors, but if you take into account like different laws within the countries, like visas, whatever, like everything, like other small aspects that you have to explore and solve, small problems you have to solve if you want to hold an event, for example, with that kind of magnitude, because the Overwatch League is not something that can operate well in a diverse market like the one in Europe. I mean, sponsors wise and such stuff. Whereas in the Americas, it is much different in that area. And I think this was something that Thorin pointed out. Like in America, or Monty, I am not sure which of them. So they have like the market that can introduce such a concept like the Overwatch League. It's already there. I mean, they have the National Basketball League, the National Baseball, whatever, and it's just another league in a sense. I mean, the law-wise, is, and all the other factors that are not like esports, but actual actual factors in a country, they are solved there because it is one country. I mean, even if they have all the states. In Europe, though, it will be a bit different. I can see it happening, but I can't see it like happening in all countries of Europe at the same time. For example, it can happen. For example, Sweden, Finland, Germany, France, and England. But I'm living in Greece, so I don't think we will see an Overwatch League spot in Greece anytime soon for the next.
The thing
few
is,
years.
if they were going to run into any problems like that, then I think like your concern's slightly overblown in a sense, because in North America they are running into issues like, for example, if you're having somebody from outside North America and you want them to live in North America and compete in the Overwatch League, they're going to need a P1 visa, etc. So you have to be negotiating that kind of stuff the whole time as well. That clearly isn't a problem for them. And if there was going to be a problem of a similar or larger level with running it in Europe, then you would have run into that with the World Cup qualifiers as well, because you're again shipping people out to a different location. You're competing there for a tournament. You need the different you have to it's definitely true that there are certain places within Europe, and I've spoken to this with people who are like working behind the scenes, that there are places within Europe that if you're a minor, or if you're just competing in a tournament prize pool for money or something, then legally you're not allowed to take part, which is one of the reasons why the Overwatch World Cup, when it has its list of places that you can live, leaves out certain nationalities, because written into their law you're not allowed to compete in video game tournaments officially. And Blizzard is aiming to do all of this above the legal line, that you don't want to just kind of ship people out and just deal with it. So I think that's something their legal team's really going to be working on. I think it's not actually going to be so much a problem with them as something that they've spent all of this dead time that we currently perceive as dead time is going to be. This has been people. Blizzard working on the legal ramifications, I think, and the logistical ramifications.
Do you see it being eventually a global league, like what they were envisioning, they were promoting, or different leagues for regions that go to a Worlds event, or some kind of event at the top of each region clash with each other? That's my.
But I think that also fit in. I think, was there anything that specifically said it was going to be a global league all around the world, from Paris to Berlin? That it's just a stupid song that leapt into my head. They're not actually very far away. From New Zealand all the way to Los Angeles or something. I don't think there was ever a concept that it would be a worldwide league, as in you're playing home and away games and you're going to have to fly for 24 hours to get from one stadium to the other. I think that the concept that I perceived from what they announced was that they were going to have the Overwatch League that was going to have different areas of localization, as in you would have a bit like the LCS, right, where you have one segment in North America, one segment in Europe, one in maybe not in Korea, we'll see what they end up doing there, but one in China, one in Australia or whatever, and then they come together for a Worlds type event, or you have different winners of different areas. So I don't see if they're really trying to get it so it's a properly worldwide league where people are flying all over the place, like football, I don't know, the World Cup of football is, where they end up flying all over the place. I don't think that'll actually work. But if they're trying to make it like a sports league, that they don't have to go stupidly global. They can have regions. Each country has its own soccer league.
The way they showed it on the video, it showed it like it was a global league that has no limitation. I mean, regional wise, for example, it's not going to be a global league with installments in North America and Europe, but that's probably what they went for, because it's more digestible and it appeals to more people. Oh guys, I can play from Sao Paulo and I can compete with the best in Europe or whatever. Anyways,
I think they just going to lawyer up and say, yeah, it's a global league, because at the end of it, sort of like a Western Eastern Conference type of thing, or I guess SCS also does it with LCK and both LCS and then wildcard teams and everything, that they are just going to have a final event where everyone competes against each other, sort of like a world championship, right?
I've actually brought up the website, and they do say that. Like, their final step is into the future, meaning, a year or two down the road or whatever. But it says, league expansion in every direction will make the Overwatch League truly global, as in it'll have stuff everywhere. Finishing with an elite tournament where champions battle champions for undisputed supremacy, which to me sounds a bit like Worlds for League of Legends, right? Where you're having champions battle champions. And they're not going to be champions if they haven't already won something, which would be their regional part of, whatever's going on. But the weird thing is like this combine stuff, because one global talent pool for everybody to dip into and stuff, just like what I still don't know what they're doing there.
To be honest, I don't really care about this, because I think that if you don't have a tournament format in a way that for example, how the games will be played, assembling any kind of team can really get you out of balance or whatever, because you need to know at least what's the environment you're going to participate in, or how you're going to face against other teams and such stuff. And obviously patch changes, like you invest much money into players and they fall out of grades because of a single patch change that favors, for example, Orisa out of the blue, and essentially Winston players are off the game and they have to to go to the bench. And that's why probably also rosters will be like having, I think it would be like a soccer analogy, where you have the quarterback like playing Winston and you have like another quarterback on the bench playing Zarya, because you need to cover all possibilities going into the Overwatch League. Now, my big questions, because I want to return to the ranking teams, is when the Overwatch League will be going on. And probably for the first season, you will have like tournaments in Europe, and you will have the Korean League on the other hand, on the other side, and you won't have like this mix of players and teams in the Korean League where you have like the invites. How would this, you imagine, will affect your rankings? For example, wouldn't this require you to go from global rankings to regional rankings straight away? I mean,
quite possibly. I mean, I'm not going to deny that if the regions completely lock each other off and like isolate from each other, then it's almost going to be kind of arbitrary, where you decide to end up placing teams against each other. I think just for the sake of the fact that we already have a world ranking series, we'd probably keep it up, just using our best intuition to try and just seed the teams together and just like have it running. But at that, and you've also got to consider, like, at that point, is there even a need for regional rankings if you have an Overwatch League, which is going to sift them out into 1 to 8, and then you have Apex, which is going to sift teams out from 1 to 8, and then you have, if you have some kind of equivalent in Europe, I mean, there might certainly be demand for one. It might be somewhere that we end up going, but yeah, there are moves that Overwatch could take that would completely obliterate any kind of sensible world rankings for sure. But it's kind of just back to the original point. It's also just kind of fun to think, even if you don't have a clue where teams might match up, like thinking about their style and thinking about how good certain players are, like Movistar Riders, where might they go if they were competing in Apex this season, or where might they sit if they were in North America? I frequently think about stuff like that. For example, like when you were talking about it being a minefield for Western teams to navigate Apex, I was thinking about this kind of stuff and whether we had really overrated the Korean teams because they're sat on home soil. And I kind of thought, if you assembled like the 2 to 4 best Korean teams when they had handed out the invites for Apex and told them to come to North America and play in, I don't know, like a Carbon series that actually had all the best teams in, where do I think they'd place? I was like, well, actually, I don't think we've overrated the Koreans at all. They'd fucking smash that. Like, they'd get it out of the park. They might get upset in a couple of games, but I think they would, broadly speaking, wreck that.
Okay.
Here we go.
Let me throw an experiment at you that I threw to Whiska. So, first game, Lunatic High faces Kongtu Bathera and he wins in the fashion they did, like reverse sweep. They tilt the set out of Kongtu Bathera. On the same day, 2 hours later, Kongtu Bathera has to face Rogue. Do you think they would have the same mentality going forward? Like in the game that it's over 1 week away, and you have to you have the time to compose yourself, and you could try again to fix your issues and such things on the same day, 2 hours away.
No, probably not. I mean, there's going to be some kind of impact, isn't there? It's a mark of a good team that you can reset yourself in that kind of format. It requires different strengths. And
but we don't see it. We don't see it. I mean, in
Apex, no, it's not something that you have to deal with at all. It's like, I mean, you have to reset yourself after each map for sure, but you don't have to reset yourself after a series going into the next one.
Yeah. Isn't it something that also kind of becomes an issue later on if we have like a 6-month, Overwatch League, and then for the rest, if we have open circuits, like okay, so for instance, let's say Envious wins the Overwatch League, right? Because they're very good at league format. It's basically, by the way, possibly the worst example I could have chosen here, but bear with me, right? So they win the Overwatch League because they can prepare from week to week towards their opponent. They're essentially like a Meta Athena, where their approach is, okay, I look at the default my opponent is playing, and then I develop a strategy around that, right? And then we have a global world, or rather regional world ranking in mind, and suddenly the circuit starts up, and these teams, I guess Carajol and I would say, would match up very differently because the skill set that are required to, compete in Apex or in a long form, league is very different to a weekend tournament. Would you see that it's wildly different in that case? Or do you anticipate that they're about the same strength?
Again, difficult to tell at this point in Overwatch because it's similar to the online and offline thing where we haven't really seen both play out and like compared teams across both of them. For example, but the one that springs to mind is if you look at IM Kyangi going into Apex and like how the teams prepared there. There was a bit of a shift in terms of like the teams' rosters for a couple of them and how they were preparing for games and stuff like that. But in general, it wasn't like you saw some vast difference between the two sides. Like Lunatic High beat Luxury Watch Blue, they became in the group stages of Apex Season 2, whereas they lost to them in the final. But it wasn't, those two teams were also pretty, it wasn't like the teams completely collapsed because they were playing in a tournament format rather than a league format. I think they're minor tweaks that are certainly going to favor certain teams and propel them, like give them an edge over others, but I don't think it's going to be something that like causes people to utterly crumble and collapse if they're playing in a tournament over a league. Like, there's different skills required for sure, but it's not something I think that's going to massively alter how teams end up panning out. It might massively alter a single tournament based on like a crucial result here or there, but over a long enough span, I think you'd see broadly similar results.
Yeah, but the issue with the IM Gyeonggi is that the tournament goes like, I would say it was probably the worst tournament ever here. It probably beats even the NG Winter Premiere that was messed up by Blizzard in the beginning and afterwards by the roster changes. In this case, in the IM Gyeonggi's case, the tournament organizers messed up the whole process. They had 6 teams, not 8, that a regular tournament would require. They also seeded 2 of them directly into the semi-finals. It was like they cut down so many games that the teams actually play within an 8 teams attending the weekend.
Are you telling me that AF Blue didn't deserve to be seeded into the semi-finals? Is that what you're telling me? Blasphemy, Events Lord Hardhat. Blasphemy.
Yeah.
I think Arhan deserves all the credit he gets for this team success.
AF Blue are coming up.
Statement.
They're on the rise, man.
On the back of Arhan, like he's carrying so hard this team. He's probably having his massage on his back after every game with all those resources putting in onto him because he's carrying his team so hard. So he needs some relief somehow.
Mano and Lucid have been a big addition to that team. Like they replaced their tank and their flex support, and they've got upgrades, big upgrades. But in a sense, it has facilitated Arhan as well. Like if you consider, like instead of thinking about the guy underperforming, if you consider it in the context that he wasn't. Like, he was getting the resources, but they weren't good enough. If you think about it like that, like the Winston player and the Flex player, they weren't good enough to actually like facilitate his aggressive play, despite the fact that they were pouring as much as they could into him. Like, now they're playing with a very similar style, but they have upgrades in terms of their team, and they're actually performing pretty well. Like, so I don't think like the difference has been. People will point to Arhan actually performing now, whereas he was like being criticized in the past. But I don't think it's actually that's the difference.
It's a team-based game, so essentially by changing one of the components, it can enhance or degenerate another component completely. And this is an issue I have with these seasons, the Apex Season 3 format, where, I'm not sure if teams were informed beforehand. It seems the case, but I'm not sure. Like, for example, that extra rule that you can swap a player mid-series, it really favors, for example, Korean teams right now, because they can have that extra player on there, so they don't have to fly him into. They don't have to randomly, for example, for one tournament to mess him into the team, because Rogue going into the tournament, they went only with 6 players. They didn't consider adding another one. So
They did actually say in a we covered it. They said we talked to what's his name, Fifi, the manager for Rogue, and he said that they had considered it, but they weren't going to field an extra player. Now, I agree with you that it would be weird just to kind of mesh someone in for a single tournament and like maybe have them sat on the bench the entire time. But there were potential candidates. Some of them actually, though, the ones that you would want have kind of been rostered, and you would have to buy them out for the tournament as well, which doesn't really make sense.
And you also saw how it plays out. I mean, they changed Putter, and it became another team, for example, after losing on control. So every small detail, I believe, it matters in this season, and also the widening of the pool, because every map is available in every game mode. From a narrowed down map pool, now it goes to the entirety of the map pool. So many more maps to practice, and many more maps where teams probably draw a wild card. And like, for example, the first game against Lunatic High, Kong2 Pathera didn't prepare for Sky Industries at all. So
the map pool is still the biggest problem with Overwatch, and it still kind of baffles me that people like got outraged about it for a while and then just were like, well, never gonna do anything about it, so we might as well just shut up. Like, this is a huge problem. You got to practice and play 14 maps, and they're going to release 3 more this year. This is madness. This is unfeasible for any competitive team.
I have the solution to it, but this show is going like really long, and I don't want to bother going into specifics, like, for example, how to fix the Apex season format, because it could be like an awesome tournament where teams can get their strongest maps in, but at the same time, they will not necessarily play them as in the West, for example, where you have a map pool of five maps, and both teams have picked 2 maps. So if you go the full distance, essentially everyone plays their strongest map, and everything is decided on the middle ground map, the 5th one, that was either remained in the map pool or somehow was elected to be in the map pool. But there's a system that you can have all teams, when they have to choose a map, they can choose a strong map of theirs. So and the other team knows that beforehand, and can also prepare counter strategies. So they could have made so many good changes, and they messed it up for me for this season. I'm really disappointed, to be honest.
Let me add some spice at the end, right? Because I think one thing we definitely need to talk about is the regional factor, and I don't really care as much about the, you're playing in Korea, you have to adapt to the culture, you have to live in a hotel. Okay, that's all a factor. But from other esports communities I've been part of, there's always, and I guess here comes the spicy part, there's always the issue that if you're a Western team, you're essentially, if you're scrimming, or if you're playing in a group against 3 Koreans, you're not actually playing against one Korean team, you're playing against Korea. And what that means is you're practicing, and for some reason, your intricate flanking strategy somehow is immediately solved, because Koreans are apparently very, very good at making, genius solutions on the fly. No, what actually probably happens is that scrim footage is leaked between these Korean teams. So, obviously, that's my interpretation of it. For instance, one game Envious had in Season 2, I think it was on Hollywood, where they tried to reach around, and was it Metathena? I forget, but like the counter was almost immediately perfect. Like they know, as if they had practiced against a strategy 10 times. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they actually had, which would be pretty stupid to practice against a team in your group, right? But maybe they practiced against Metathena in the past and they knew the strategy and hadn't solved it in the scrims. But isn't that also a pretty big thing, that while Korean teams play for themselves, Western teams are constantly playing against the entirety of Korea.
Would definitely be a factor if the assumption is true that they leak scrim results and stuff, but given how vehemently they almost crucified Kib for leaking a kill feed and branded him as a scrim leaker, then I think that it says something about the Korean culture, or at least the Korean fan culture in general, is very much against leaking scrim results.
Fan culture, sure, but I can tell you there's huge precedent in all other esports. It was terrible in StarCraft 2. It was, okay, dead game, but it was horrible in World of Warcraft. And in League of Legends, it was also sort of rumored that this is what's happening, right? It's pretty much a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because if you don't practice in Korea in all these esports, you're not getting top-level practice, so you're doing it. And unless, for instance... Okay, I don't want to throw him under the bus because I probably don't remember 100%ly, because I think there was way back an interview with Huck where he mentioned that he had to sort of attain the Korean status, so people were actually friendly with him, that these things stopped happening. And that was a reason why his game could never be strictly about strategy or like very innovative play, but rather about, winning with weapons the other already knows by just wielding them better, right? So yes, I have no ground to go on, or I've talked to no team where they said to me that this is probably happening. It's just an observation I had, and maybe they're very good at making stuff up on the fly. That's totally possible, and I end up looking like an ass. But if I look at the esports history, that's definitely has happened, right?
I can imagine it happening in the West as well if a team came over.
Sure.
Like I know that there are people, like players or whatever, who'll talk and not talk and discuss specific strategies, but they're friends and they'll talk outside of the game and they'll kind of discuss like ideas and how you should approach certain situations and whatever. And you have kind of informal sister team situations within the Korean teams and within the European teams. You have regular scrim partners, stuff like that. So even if you weren't intending to do things, if you're, for example, scrimming against Rogue and you see them running a really awesome triple DPS thing, and you then have another block and you're playing against like Luxury Watch Blue or something, you're like, hey, let's try out this strat that they used against us. And by like osmosis, it can certainly spread within a scene, even if there wasn't direct intent to like maliciously gang up on them or whatever. So yeah, it's a factor for sure. But of course the solution,
I don't think there's any maliciousness. That's just Korean practice. I don't think they're like Western teams, right? It's more like, yeah, that's what we do. We talk about games a lot, and there was a prominent incident, for instance, in League of Legends where Dyrus leaked some secret strategy of Dignitas, and it ruined their chances of winning some international tournament. And everyone's like, "What are you doing, mate?" Like, it was just, just dropped out in speech, and the opponent team just picked it up and, smashed them based on that. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, the answer to all of this as well is just to have more regular, actually global tournaments. Like, that would solve so many of these problems. It's just to have a couple of regular global tournaments with some really good teams not from just a single region. Like, even just between the West would be cool to have some North American and European teams. Hopefully we'll have that at TakeOver, because Rogue are coming down along with a lot of the good European teams. They've still got 3 invites left. There were reports that they were going to go over to North American teams, 2 of those, but as yet unannounced. One of them probably going to E-United as well, given that they dropped out of the qualifier at the last second. So it should be a fairly stacked tournament, but I'm kind of hoping for more things like I Am Kengi to kind of come up, where you've got, or with a better format, just a proper double elimination tournament, or even a single elim with some good seeding, where you see teams actually go up against each other. Just these kind of things more regularly would be awesome for the scene.
Yeah. Another thing that you could do is just have sister teams that you could practice with, and then nothing leaks out, right? Coincidentally, which region mostly, has these sister team types of, it's Koreans. I wonder why, right? So...
Because they're smart. That's why. because they have the infrastructure. I mean, Rogue could have done it. Rogue and Envious could have made a pact only to scrim each other and never to, leak Rogue's kind of style. And certainly the aggression and the triple DPS is something that the Korean teams haven't faced against. Certainly at that kind of level before. It wasn't something they were particularly experimenting with at all previously. A lot of the teams have not been built around kind of having 3 really strong DPS players on the team, although some teams like Lunatic House, which like their off-tank Zumba over to Soldier 76, which has been prevalent throughout a lot of other teams as well. But this, like, they could have done that, but they're kind of more just individual and expecting everybody else to be individual, and like you're approaching it from your own angle and trying to take it on. It's not, I think it would be a bad thing for the scene overall for it to get really split between like the Western teams are making their own little factions and the Korean teams are making their factions, and they're just trying to like using it as a pissing contest to see which region's the best. That's just a nice spin-off, is that you get that kind of stuff. I actually just want to see which team is best. I don't really care about the region they're from.
Yeah. True. And you heard it from the man himself, Sideshow. We need more LAN tournaments. Let's make it happen. Overwatch League will be huge. It will be, I think.
Yeah. So I guess this is running fairly long. So I guess what I want to do is sort of compress this episode into a too long didn't watch type of concept, right? So,
and put on Reddit. And put on Reddit in the timestamps, like for example, too long to watch.
Exactly. So, Sideshow, there's a theory of a multiverse, right? So, like, maybe our universe is not... You have no idea where this is going, but be with me. So, the theory of the multiverse is that we have other universes outside of our own, and one such universe just popped into existence, right? That happened probably, let me not lie, late last year. And basically what happened was there was a blank space of nothing. And it immediately into existence sprung a bowl of kimchi on the one hand and a baguette on the other, right? And because you don't know how these things move against each other, you can only really compare how they move towards each other and then away. You don't know which is faster, right, in that sense. So you don't know how they relate to each other. You don't know which is, better in that sense. So what happened next was there was a net that sprung into existence. And on the one side was the kimchi bowl, and on the other side was the baguette. And the baguette at the time had already hardened, so it was very hard to break, right? It smashed all the, Swedish meatballs and all the, endemic European food. It just decimated it. Then it went to another space, and then it smashed hamburgers. Like, hamburgers are the worst, man. Like, they just splat on the floor, like, just gone. You can't even repair them. Like, a Swedish meatball is sort of sturdy, right? Not hamburgers. So what happened was then that somewhere in, I guess, a cabin in the woods, or it could really just be a cabin somewhere in a back garden in England.
Very much like this one.
What a coincidence, right? The door opened, and the guy that was in this cabin looked into the new universe, and he saw the kimchi bowl. He saw on the other side the baguette, and the net in the middle, and he's like, well, this makes no sense, right? There's one crucial thing missing. So he went up to the net with a ladder, and on the game net, he placed the ladder, brought up on one point, right, and said, okay, this is all right in the world. Now we know which team is, or which team, didn't happen, which object is further up the ladder. And the baguette was like, but I need to run around the net first. And he's like, and the guy's like, no, I don't care. Like, the kimchi bowl is already up here. So there's basically no way for the baguette to come up a ladder, because baguettes can't climb ladders in the first place. Kimchi bowls somehow can, right? So this is as far as my analogies goes, which is very much overrated. So I guess with this, we finish the third episode with our guest. Thank you very much for joining us today, Sachu. Anything
Thanks for having me. No, just take a look at the rankings and compare them to the ones that we've just released at the top of the site as well, which are algorithmic. So you can see what the numbers say. But they tend to underrate the Koreans, you know, because not many games played. So if you want to see NiP be the best team in Europe, if you want to relive the glory days of autumn and winter 2016, then go over to the rankings.
All right. Then thanks
Great.
for watching. Bye.